Let's go. Here is my story. Today's story is about receiving an email from one of my business competitors. When I opened it, I was shocked to see a picture of my wife attached. What I saw, I could not accept, and I could never imagine my wife as a cheater. Well, my friends, let's go to the story and see what was in that email. When plotting revenge, first dig 2 graves. I first heard this saying at the ripe old age of 25, when an early career mentor offered the sage advice in an attempt to diffuse my anger. He was successful. A few weeks later, when I looked back on the affront, I realized that it had indeed been minor. The advice stayed with me, and numerous times after, when feeling attacked, I would take comfort in the words. In fact, I ended up using it as something of a safe spot, convincing myself that I was being the mature professional by letting go of the slight, whether it was perceived or real. Update: I met my wife, Mary Helen, whom I simply call Helen, when I was 27, and she was 25. We hit it off pretty fast, finding we shared the same likes and carried similar opinions in most areas. It helped that she was a very attractive young woman that met most of the characteristics I like. She is tallish, 5'8", and slender with long, lovely legs. She has a cute smiling that always disarms me. Similarly, I think she likes how I am put together. She is always quick to say that she likes bigger guys. And at 6 and 190 pounds, I certainly fit that description. Still, I would call myself more rugged than handsome. Quite happy to have her as the looks winner in the family. Our dating progressed to the serious stage quite swiftly, as I think both of us were ready to settle down. So, 133 months after our initial introduction, we were standing at the altar of the Catholic Church, saying our vows. The next 7 years seemed to fly by, and we were blessed with 2 wonderful children, our son Greg and our daughter Sally. Things seemed near perfect, and besides success in our family life, my career was also doing quite well. I had left the corporate world 2 years after we got married, and with Helen's full support, had started my own business. Amazingly, it had proved successful almost from the start, and we were now doing quite well. Actually, we were doing better than well, which had allowed my wife to quit her job and concentrate on the family. In addition, she was active in the church and did some volunteer work with several nonprofits. For fun, our success had also allowed us to afford nice things. And during our marriage, we had progressed from our initial apartment through a starter home to the large residence we now enjoyed. It had been almost a perfect run. And looking back, I should have paid more attention to how good things were going. I first met J.D. Thornton at a customer function. They were having a reception for key suppliers, and we were introduced by the VP of Procurement. We engaged in a brief conversation, and I learned enough to know that he wasn't a competitor, but that he was quite full of himself. It became almost comical to listen to him talk, and several times when glancing at the customer, he winked at me to let me know he thought the same. After that, months went by, and I had completely forgotten about him, when one day, I got a call from him on my cell phone. "Hey man, this is J.D. Thornton. Remember we met a while ago?" He belted out quickly, bringing back the memory of our brief conversation. "Hello, what can I do for you? I wanted to see if you were available for lunch. I have a business idea I'd like to discuss that I think could be beneficial for both of us," he explained reluctantly. I agreed, and the following week found us in a booth in a small out-of-the-way diner. We had just sat down when he got a phone call, and quickly he was in the middle of a loud conversation. While annoyed at the distraction, it did give me an opportunity to size the man up. I guess JD was around 40, and he looked to be a couple of inches taller than me. In total, I took him to be a man that was more focused on business than his appearance. "Sorry about that," he mumbled when he ended the call a couple of minutes later. "Yeah, no problem," I replied, then continued, "What do you have in mind?" "Let's order first. I'm starved," he answered. He waved the waitress over, and when she left, we idly chatted about random things until our food arrived. Only when we were almost finished did he broach the subject of the meeting. "Look, I think between our 2 companies, we have the capabilities to replace the supplier for the Neptune product line. You have a solid supply chain for the technical components, and my fabricators in Mexico can bring in the structural elements very cheap. I'm thinking we join up and see what we can do," he explained. Surprisingly, his idea had merit. A lot of merit, actually, and I sat up in my chair as the potential sank in. We spent another hour discussing the concept, and then agreed that we would spend some time the following week getting into details. For the next few days, I pulled together some information to get prepared and also did some back-of-the-envelope calculations on the idea's potential. Conservatively, it looked like I could add 30% to the income of my business, and the best part was it could be done with almost no investment. The meeting the following week went well, and we put together a straw man of the new venture, including the business structure. We talked about approaching the customer and presenting our plan. But JD was adamant that we wait until we had developed it further. We agreed that the next step was due diligence on the supply chain, so as soon as we finished, I set up meetings with my key suppliers. Over the next month, we met with them, and although I thought it would be prudent to visit his fabricators in Mexico, JD wanted to wait until we finished the technical due diligence. So far, things had gone exceedingly well, and my enthusiasm was evident to Helen. I had been holding off telling her about the opportunity until it had more legs, but finally I was forced to. "What's got you so giddy?" she asked, then added, "You've been buzzing for weeks." I started to laugh from her description and then explained, "I'm working on a new business idea that I think will be very good. It should make us a lot of money. Don't you think we have enough money?" she asked, although I knew part of it was meant as a tease. "Keeping you looking good is expensive," I said instantly, knowing I chose my words poorly. "Oh, really?" she replied as her left eyebrow arched. "Sorry, that didn't come out right," I followed. "I would hope not," she said, fighting annoyance. Later that night, as soon as the kids were in bed, we made slow, satisfying love. "You're so proud of yourself. I think this business thing has made you hot?" she asked. "You make me hot, and the business thing is to take care of the family," I answered. "Honey, if it works, maybe we can give some to the church," she whispered while snuggling closer. Helen's caring soul was one of the things I loved so much about her. It wasn't the first time she had communicated she had all she wanted and wanted to help others. Certainly, her work with the church and the nonprofits played a part, but I knew it was something central to her as well. Even without those influences, I think she would have made a similar request. "We'll see," I replied, pulling her tightly against me. I'm not naturally optimistic or enthusiastic when it comes to business matters, as experience has taught me it was far better to be deliberate and maintain an even keel. However, I was breaking this tenet with the new venture. There was a J-ness in my step, excitement in my day-to-day dealings, and a smile that I couldn't get off my face. Thus, I didn't pick up on the message at first when JD suddenly went radio silent. I had been trying to contact him through phone calls and emails for almost a week when I realized something was amiss. And during a phone call with one of my long-term suppliers, the reality was suddenly made clear. "Hey, I thought you and JD were working on this Neptune thing together." Ron, the technical manager at the supplier, asked at the end of an unrelated call. "We are," I answered. "Okay, do well. I think you might want to look into it," he said, showing obvious discomfort before adding, "Give Sam a call." Sam or Samantha was an older woman that handled contracts for the company, and as soon as I ended the call with Ron, I was on the phone to her. "Sam, what's going on?" I asked after the normal pleasantries. "It's confidential," she started. Then, no doubt thinking about the years we had known each other, she said, "The guy JD said he was going to go this alone." Update 1. Now it was all suddenly very clear. JD Thornton had used me, manipulated me to get knowledge of the supply chain, and once educated, was now going to cut me out. It was a bad trick, but thinking about it, I realized I shouldn't be surprised. My initial thoughts on him were not positive, but I had allowed my interest in the deal and the eagerness to make money to overcome my concerns. It took another 2 weeks to get the complete picture, and in that time, I learned that he had contacted all my suppliers and even made a presentation to the customer. I seethed as I realized all this had been done behind my back with definite malice. "Hey, JD, I said through the phone, with dismissive arrogance. It had taken 2 more weeks to get him to answer, and I suspected he felt he now had the deal with a bow around it, making me no longer a threat. Thus, he could enjoy the win while taking the opportunity to rub my nose in it. "JD, I'd just like to hear in your own words what you're thinking," I asked, immediately feeling the inadequacy of the message. "Wrong," he laughed. "Wrong. I'm going to make a lot of money," he replied, and then hung up. Stunned, infuriated, angry, 1,000 feelings swept through my body for the next few days, like being on a Ferris wheel enduring a never-ending cycle. Then very slowly, one thought began to separate from the others: revenge. I wanted to kick JD in the balls and have him feel the deep humiliation that I was experiencing. Looking back, that desire was so powerful it blocked me from all-round rational thought. Amazingly, I was able to set aside my emotions as I plotted my revenge and created an attack strategy. First, I intended to reach out to 2 suppliers that I knew were essential to the deal and use my long-term relationship to try and convince them to drop JD. Then, I intended to strike back. His line of business wasn't all that differentiated, so I was hopeful that with some work, I would be able to find others that at least would threaten his customer base. Carl Westbrook was the owner of the primary supply company, and I had known him for almost 10 years. He was in his early 70s, one of those men that would likely die within weeks of retiring. And although our relationship had always been positive, I wasn't sure what to expect sitting in his office. I explained the situation in detail, leaving nothing out, while he leaned back in his chair and took it all in. "Okay, what else you got?" he asked when I was done. His answer confused me, so I asked, "What do you mean, Carl?" "Duck him is what I mean. "I'm too old to work with that bast," he answered. Then, after a pause, he leaned across the desk and started again. "How long have I known you?" 10 years. In all that time, you've never been anything but straightforward and honest. You know how rare that is." "Thanks, Carl," I replied with emotion. "Duck him, he's in his hall," he reiterated. The next supplier wasn't as straightforward, and it took some pleading on my part. However, I was eventually able to get them to agree to cut off ties with JD, too. I had to promise that I would do everything I could to replace the volume they were foregoing. But if my plan worked, I knew that wouldn't be a problem. I was pleasantly surprised with the success of the first phase of my plan. I had thought it might take more time, more convincing, but there seemed to be a consistent distaste for JD, which helped. Feeling good, I convinced Helen to let the kids spend the night with their grandparents so we could have some alone time. After a nice dinner, we were curled up in bed after a fulfilling round of lovemaking, simply talking and cuddling. "What happened to your new venture?" she asked. I had purposefully shielded her from the drama, but I couldn't hide my loss of enthusiasm, so I was a bit surprised it had taken her this long to probe. "Oh, it hit a bump in the road," I answered, purposefully being vague, as I knew she wouldn't understand or support my tactics. "And I had already spent all the money you promised," she teased. "Patience, sweetie," I countered while tickling her ribs. My touch made her squirm and giggle, and when she finally settled in a breathless voice, she said, "I would still like to do something for the church." The next part of my plan took much more effort. For about a month, it consumed all my available hours, with even Helen commenting on my lack of family time. I was able to locate 2 companies that had the capabilities to compete with JD, and which had similar, if not superior, cost structures. I used my contacts at the customer to get them established as vendors, knowing they would have, at a minimum, a detrimental impact on JD's pricing. In addition, through my efforts, I realized one would be an outstanding supplier to fill JD's scope on Neptune if I decided to resurrect that initiative. If the customer suspected what I was up to, they never brought it up and seemed thrilled to improve their supplier base. Surprisingly, and quite contrary to my expectations, JD had been silent about my actions to cut off the suppliers. Then, I learned that the companies I introduced were asked to bid on some competing work, and I was certain I would hear from him. I had even scripted and practiced the message I would deliver that was intended to humiliate him the way he had done with me. Still, all stayed silent, and after almost 6 months had elapsed, the whole situation started to fade from my thoughts. When plotting revenge, first dig 2 graves. There should be a corollary to that message that goes, if you can't follow the advice, at least don't seek revenge on someone meaner than you. Unfortunately, the solace I took in JD's silence was about to be interrupted, and I would learn that I was only using conventional weapons while he went full thermonuclear. "Hey, Chief, we should talk," JD said over the phone. I had recognized his number, so I was prepared and replied, "JD, how's business?" "Oh, you know, up and down," he said, and then added seriously, "Let's get together." "JD, I have absolutely no interest in never seeing you again. I think things have ended as they should, and I'm moving on," I answered. "Let me tell you, you want to come see me," he said, slipping back into his condescending tone. "No, I'm good," I replied and hung up. After that, I went about my day, giggling to myself several times at my victory. I was just about to head home when I noticed an email from JD. Opening it, I was stunned to see a picture of my wife attached. Helen was standing with her back to the camera, but partially turned so the side of her face was shown. There was no question it was her, but what made it shocking was that she was dressed only in a black thong. The setting, however, wasn't our house. I didn't recognize any of the furnishings or the color of the walls, which left me confused about what I was seeing. However, slowly the reality started to sink in, and knowing it was coming from JD, I suddenly felt it must be sinister. Several times I reached for the keyboard, but each time I backed away. I needed to know more, to somehow gather more information and collect my thoughts before I replied. For that reason, I merely turned off the computer and left for home. On the drive, my thoughts went to my wife's involvement, and I hoped that she would rush to my arms and explain it all away. However, when I walked in the door, both wife and kids acted like it was just another day. My wife was all smiles, and the kids crawled into my lap after dinner while we watched a movie. Later, after she had cleaned the kitchen, Helen joined us with a glass of wine and engaged me in her normal discussion about all that had happened that day. However, while she spoke, my mind refused to let go of the vision of her in the picture. "What else has been going on?" I asked, although it was a first attempt. What I was trying to do was give her the opportunity to come clean and explain things. It failed, as all she did was start talking again about her charitable activities. I tried again when the kids had gone to bed, but that effort was unsuccessful as well. Evidently, my lovely wife was capable of keeping her secret buried while conducting herself in the normal family fashion. In fact, her manner was so relaxed I began to wonder if somehow he had digitally placed her into the picture. I didn't contact JD the next day, as I just didn't want to give the bastard the satisfaction. However, the following morning, I couldn't take it anymore and I dialed his number. "Well, duck me, look who called," he laughed. "Where did you get that?" I asked, unable to think of anything else to say. "Oh, I got a lot more than that," he answered, laughing again. "What the duck did you do, you ducking ah?" I screamed into the phone, no longer able to contain myself. "I ducked you hard. You wanted to play games, and you lost," he replied, no longer laughing. Then, after a second of silence, he continued, "Now, if you don't want your life on display to the world, be here at 3 p.m. today." I was shaking as I set the phone down. And thinking about the dilemma, I realized my choice was either to confront Helen or go to JD's and find out more. Since I was still confused, I decided I would attend the meeting that afternoon at 3 p.m. I pulled open the door of JD's office, and upon entering, I was immediately escorted to a large conference room by the young receptionist. I waited nervously for 10 minutes before JD, along with 2 other men, entered. "I'm glad I'm not you," JD laughed, then continued. "That's Conrad behind you. He's here to make sure you don't get stupid. This is Don. You'll learn more about him in a minute." "What's this all about?" I asked, needing to say something. "You know what it's about or suspect?" JD replied, then reached for a remote, hit a button, and said, "I thought we'd start here." There was a flicker on the screen that covered the far wall, and then a video started instantly. Every muscle in my body tensed as I saw Helen in the arms of Dawn. She was, that I recognized as the one in the emailed picture. Then, with another press of the remote, JD paused the scene. "Your wife is a beautiful woman," he said, looking towards me for a moment before restarting the video. I was stunned when my wife, with no further prodding, moved towards it. I had never seen my wife respond so completely during our lovemaking. And just for a moment, I wondered if it was indeed my wife I was watching. Again, I considered whether they had managed to stage things. Perhaps it was an actress made to look like Helen. I could feel my body tensing. And despite what I just saw, I couldn't accept it. I felt it had to be forced or staged. I just couldn't gauge Helen as a cheater. "What the duck is this? What did you do to her? How did you make her do this?" I spewed forth, no longer able to hold back my outburst. Conrad squeezed my shoulders, and once more, JD looked at him for a moment before replying. "She did it all on her own. I'll explain it all later, but let's watch the movie. It's good. I could probably sell it." "JD, you ducked up fast," I said. My comment only brought a laugh from him. Then he said, "Let's watch the next one." Quickly, he fast-forwarded through the video, and then landed on another scene. This time, my wife was already on the bed with a pair of black heels. Suddenly, I felt the remaining energy drain from my body as it dawned on me that this was an entirely different encounter. In fact, I recall her going out to dinner with the girls on a Thursday night about a month before and wearing the heels. It had struck me at the time that she looked a bit overdressed, but I had put it down to simply not understanding how women did things. Now it appeared she was having an affair. I glanced at JD and Dawn, and when I saw them smiling at me, I knew they had manipulated the exchange to rub my nose in it even more. It was so wrong and so evil that I couldn't fathom how a person could want to act this way. At that moment, I knew I was dealing with a depraved individual capable of anything. Seemingly ignoring my outburst, JD started to speak. "I guess I owe you the details. Let me start by saying that your work to duck me on the Neptune deal was good. I was surprised since I didn't think you had it in you. But you should have known I would just let it sit. That was your duck up, and it was a big one." I fought to hold back the tears while I looked down at the table and thought about it all. It was such a sudden act of destruction to the marriage that I had enjoyed and worked so hard for. Then there was the impact on our kids. How would they respond to a divorce? I wanted there to be an explanation. I wanted desperately for Helen to have some reason, some story that would at least give me hope. But deep down, I knew there was just too much evidence. "What do you want?" I finally forced out in total defeat. As soon as I spoke the words, I could see JD's expression change. Now he looked serious, and with a slow nod of his head, he started, "What do I want? You ducked with me, and I won. Then why am I here?" I said angrily. "You're here so I could see the look on your face," he replied. Then, after a deep breath, he started again. "But now that you know I won, I have a proposition for you." "What?" I asked. "I've got enough video of your wife that it would ruin her and embarrass you and the rest of y'all's family. Needless to say, the church wouldn't be amused. Now, I'm willing to trade all the stuff to you in exchange for you signing over your business," he explained. "Duck you," I replied. "I'd understand if you said no. Of course, that probably means divorce, especially when all the material gets out. But who could blame you since she turned out to be such an easy ducking slot?" It'd be messy, and your kids would learn the truth when they got older. Also, you'd look like who couldn't keep his woman, he taunted. When I didn't reply, he continued, now, if you see it my way, you'd at least get out with your dignity. Of course, losing the business hurt, but you could start again. JD, you are the most ducked-up person I've ever known. What if I go to the police? I threatened. You aren't going to the police. Now, think about it tonight. And tomorrow at 9 a.m., be back here with your answer, he replied. And with his words, I felt Conrad's hands leave my shoulders. Update 3. My hands were shaking so hard it was difficult to drive. The entire way, I thought about what I would do when I came face to face with my wife. I knew I had to hold back my temper as violence would only create a deeper hole. But I was truly clueless as to what to say and how to react. I sat in the driveway for 15 minutes before I was able to summon the courage to enter the house. Hi, honey, my wife called out when I entered the kitchen, and looking past the dining room, I could see our kids in front of the TV watching cartoons. Sensing something was amiss, she asked, is everything all right? Yeah, Helen. After dinner, we need to talk, I said, and for a moment, I saw panic in her eyes. Okay, she replied and turned back to the stove. Helen took her time putting the kids to bed, which made me wonder if she suspected the subject of our discussion. Finally, after I was sure they were asleep, I nodded for her to join me. And she, together with me, moved to the living room sofa. Look, I'm not going to beat around the bush. Are you having an affair? I asked. No, of course not. Why would you ask such a thing? She replied, but in her eyes, I could see the guilt. Helen, who is Dawn? I said suddenly. The guilt in her eyes turned to panic. How did you? Look, I can explain. Go ahead, I said as calmly as possible. When she became silent, I'm sorry, she said after several failed attempts to speak and started to sob. I let her cry until she started to regain some control. Then I asked, tell me what happened. I met him at church, and I don't know. We got to know each other. And it just happened, she forced out. You had sex with him? I clarified, and she nodded her head. So, how long has it been going on? I whispered. There were several seconds of silence before she whispered back, too many. Do you love him? I made myself ask, wondering which answer was best. No, she replied instantly. No more, Helen, I said and started to rise, suddenly feeling exhausted. How did you know? She asked. I just did, I said. The drive to JD's the next morning was the hardest thing I had ever done. I had decided to sign over the business, deciding that dragging everything out into the open served no purpose. If I was going to divorce Helen, I far preferred to do it quietly. However, I was deeply concerned about my kids first and then employees. Many employees had been with me since the start, and I had no belief that JD would treat them fairly. What's the answer? He asked, dispensing with formalities as he brusquely entered the conference room with Conrad right behind. I'll let you have the business, but I want all the stuff, everything, I told him. I thought that's what you'd say. So it's all in that box, he said, nodding towards a container at the end of the table. Then he added, I've got no use for it anyway. I've seen it enough. Then he pushed a piece of paper in front of me. Even though I knew I should probably consult an attorney, I just wanted it over. Reading through it quickly, I saw that he had structured the transaction as a payout of earnings that I knew would never come but which provided him with tax cover. I signed it. JD was smiling at me, and I was about to leave when he said, before you go, take the disc marked number 34 and watch it. I gave him a hard stare as he turned and left, closing the door behind him. Despite feeling manipulated, I picked through the box and collected the disc. Duck you, I said and stepped past him. By the way, she's called Dawn twice so far this morning. We agreed it was over. I can't control your wife, and Dawn no longer works for me, he laughed. Final update. I was seething as I made my way to the office to announce the change. It took several hours of meetings and explanations before I was finally able to depart. When I finally got home, Helen was watching TV with the kids, and her nervous demeanor left me doubting whether I still had a wife. I told her I thought it would be best if she took the kids to her parents for the night, as we had some serious talking to do. With a quick nod, she said she'd make it happen. An hour later, she was back and met me in the living room. I already had the disc loaded in the player, so with a simple press, the TV came on with the scene of her and Dawn discussing impregnation. How did this start? I asked, ignoring her words. No, I don't know, she answered. When's your next period start? I said. Sunday, I think, she replied. And you've been with him and me, so you might be, I stated. Yes, she answered softly. Let me see your phone, I demanded. After working through the screens, I got to the recent calls and saw that 5 connections had been made that day. Is this his number? I asked. Yes, she said in a voice barely above a whisper. I could see her body start to shake. Did you see him today? I demanded. No, she answered emphatically, as if somehow it absolved her of all her sordid indiscretions. Why did you talk to him? I asked. I wanted to know what was going on, she replied. It took 5 calls. I asked. What else did you discuss? I don't know, that's it, she answered nervously. Really? You didn't ask him if he was in love with you? You didn't tell him you were in love with him? You didn't ask him about his past child? I fired at her rapidly. I remembered the intimacy she had shown in the tapes, and knew to her, their connection was more than casual sex. The look she gave me let me know I had been correct. And some or all of the things I had stated had been discussed. I'm sorry, was all she could force out. Let me tell you what happened, I started, but paused so she could wipe her eyes, then continued as calmly as I could. Remember that business thing I was working on a few months ago? Well, I was working it with a guy named J.D. Thornton. He tried to cheat me, and when I found out, I did some things to get even. He couldn't handle that I got back at him, so he hired your boy Don to seduce you as payback to me. They were intentionally trying to destroy our lives. Oh my God, no, Helen whimpered. Yes, and I had to see all the videos they made and them laughing about what an easy duck you were, I explained. She cried as the tears let forth, but in her words, I wasn't sure if her emotion was for me or Dawn. I left her on the sofa with her head in her hands and went to make a drink. Just as I was pouring the bourbon, I heard her moving. When I returned, she had disappeared to the back of the house. A few minutes later, she appeared dressed to go out, and instinctively, I knew where she was heading. You're going to him? I challenged her. I need to check on the kids, she said, although we both knew she was lying. She didn't return until the next morning, and I never tried her cell nor challenged her. When she arrived, I was too emotionally spent, and although I knew we were likely done, we went through the next few days without any further discussion. Our interactions were forced, and to deal with the awkwardness, most of our attention was directed towards the kids. A week had elapsed since our discussion when I received a text from JD with an attached link. As soon as I opened it, I could tell it was a video, so I stopped it, then attached it to an email and sent it to myself to open on the desktop computer. The scene opened with her in Dawn's arms, crying uncontrollably. She was wearing the clothes she had put on when she left me to check on the kids, so it appeared she had gone straight to her lover. Baby, calm down, Dawn's clear voice came through. Why did you do it? Helen forced out. Don't worry, it's okay, he answered evasively. Don't leave me. What if I'm... She started but stopped mid-sentence. Are you? He quickly responded, as a smile came to his face. I don't know, maybe, she said. The video continued. Surprisingly, she followed his direction, and they started the same as they did before. I moved out a few days later, never even bothering to tell Helen. I saw the recent tape. There really was no point, as in the end, it was just more of the same. Dawn cut off all contact with her, which set her into a tailspin, and she actually followed him to Las Vegas to try and keep things going. But after a few weeks, the reality finally hit, and she returned. Miraculously, she didn't get pregnant, which was a relief, although part of me thought it would serve her right if she ended up with a kid from one of them. Of course, her parents reached out multiple times, as did the priest from the church, pleading with me to forgive and think of the family. They knew her indiscretions were significant, although I doubt they understand the depth of her depravity. I stood firm, offering no indication of hope, and finally, the calls stopped. Now I spend most of my time trying to resurrect my business. With the pending divorce, money is quite tight, which has put me in strained living conditions. But I have made some good progress. Fortunately, I maintain good relations with my customers, and JD seems to be purposefully trying to disrespect them. It will take time, but I'm confident things will work out business-wise. Because of kid things, I see Helen at least once a week, and almost every time, she makes a plea for us to sit down and talk things through. On a few occasions, she's even attempted a seduction, although I've made it clear that it's not in the cards. I could forgive her for the sex, even though it would be difficult, but it was clear that she was ready to leave me for Dawn, and that's not something I can forget. So much change so fast has been very hard to accept, and I seem to live in an emotional roller coaster world. Unfortunately, a little voice in my brain continues to whisper a message that everything started because of my need for revenge and that my wife is an unfortunate victim of these events. So remember the prophetic words of wisdom. When plotting revenge, first dig 2 graves. Thank you for being a part of our journey, and we look forward to sharing more powerful stories with you in the future. We encourage you to subscribe to our channel and stay connected with our community. Remember, this channel exists because of your support, and I want it to be a place where we can all come together, learn, and have a great time. Your feedback is vital, and I appreciate every single suggestion and comment you provide. Take care of yourself, and see you soon. That's the story. If you liked it, please support us with a like as well as subscribe to our channel. Write in the comments what you think about the story. Thank you for being here with us.